Hello again, it's great seeing everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather, 9th day of March, 2022. I'm David Percy. Up first, hazardous weather graphic showing some red areas there for the eastern Norton Sound and south coast of the Seward Peninsula, including Nome, on over to White Mountain, Golovin, then down to St. Michael and Stebbins. That's a high wind warning out. Let's see, that's out for Thursday through Thursday night for northeast winds. Will continue to increase with gusts above 65 miles an hour during that time frame. Again, for Thursday through Thursday night and early Friday there. So pretty windy conditions will continue with the warning in that area. And then the other red shaded area is the Alaska Range and the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country area. And that's a winter storm warning for heavy snow and gusty winds, creating poor visibilities, hazardous travel conditions in that area. And that's out through Thursday night. And then the yellow shaded areas are winter weather advisories. In the case of the Copper River Basin, looking for 6 to 12 inches of snow through Thursday night to fall across Copper River Basin, picking up this evening, overnight tonight, and then through tomorrow night. So a fair amount of snow there, mostly north of Gakona, and then northern Kuskokwim Valley into the Fairbanks area, Tanana, Battles Fort, Yukon, winter weather advisories there for gusty winds, and visibility is down to less than a quarter mile at times with the additional snowfall. And also for the southwest coast, Yukon Kuskokwim Delta, lower Kuskokwim Valley area, that's winter weather advisory through Thursday night for snow, blowing snow, reducing visibilities at times. Moving on to the satellite imagery, showing a system moving northward and weakening there off the southwest coast. Brought rain and gusty winds into the Bristol Bay area today, with Cape Nunam having a peak wind gust 46 miles an hour. Igagik there closer into King Salmon, peak wind gust 36 miles an hour, but even stronger winds up over the northwest part of the state, northeast 30, gusts 50 miles an hour, and even higher gusts than that at higher elevations, such as Howard Pass, for example, there in the Brooks Range. Otherwise, a couple inches of snow coming across northern Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley today, with that moisture lifting northward there, anywhere from 2 to 4 inches. And Sleep Mute picked up about 5 to 7 inches, with half an inch water equivalent falling there, all falling in the form of snow. Farther to the south, Togiak, warmer temperatures there, rain and snow, mostly rain, 3/4 of an inch though. Those are 12-hour amounts. And about an inch, the heavier rainfall amount there at Dillingham had about an inch of precipitation in the last 12 hours. Kodiak picking up half an inch of rainfall. And on the chart, you can see the areas of snow moving into the central and eastern interior, all the way down into southern Alaska, Copper River Basin snow and the increase. Dry over the Panhandle with some clearing down to the south. And then the rain, Kodiak Island up into Bristol Bay, with that milder southeast flow there in the Alaska Peninsula areas. And gusty winds, you can see a pretty tight gradient there with the Arctic high over the Arctic Ocean. And the gradient pretty tight right along the Brooks Range and to the south, kicking those winds up. Tonight, that high center settles right in over the north slope, and lower pressure to the south tightens, it keeps the gradient tight, snow and blowing snow. With the new snowfall, that's where the winter storm warnings are out, over the eastern interior areas, and the winds will be much lighter from about the Tanana Valley and the eastern Alaska Range to the Copper River Basin. A fair amount of snow expected, periods of snow across southern Alaska, Manaska-Susitna Valley, Kenai Peninsula, rain and snow along the coastline, increasing rain on the Panhandle along the coast, otherwise increasing clouds there, with rain and snow continuing for the Alaska Peninsula, rain and snow showers for the western central Aleutian areas, with strongest winds up over the northern Bering Sea. Good gales out for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. for tonight through tomorrow, with winds 45 knots in the forecast, sustained for the marine forecast there. Snow and blowing snow continues for Thursday. Upper Tanana Valley area in the Yukon Flats, but lighter winds. It stays cloudy with periods of snow across southern Alaska. Clear and colder and windy up over the northern interior and back to the northwest, with a high wind warning out for the southern coast of the Seward Peninsula and eastern Norton Sound there in the Lotto Hills. Stays pretty unsettled with a lot of moisture, low pressure, a couple of lows there over the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. So all the southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians will be cloudy with pretty good chance of seeing some moisture at some point in the day tomorrow, and rain and snow North Gulf Coast, increasing rain and snow across the southeast coast. And that'll continue into Friday as that front just breaks apart. Weak trough left there off the south coast of the Panhandle. A lot of leftover moisture in the area with low pressure moving into the Yukon. Winds lighten up, gradient relaxes somewhat, but the pattern more or less stays the same. Snow, southern Alaska, rain and snow on the North Gulf Coast, unsettled over the southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians, and clear and dry on the chilly side for the interior. Lows tonight, anywhere from 15 to 20 below for the Arctic coast, North Slope areas, and in the mid-minus teens for the Brooks Range. South of the mountains, those single numbers, 10 to 15. Central interior, upper 20s. South central Alaska to mid-30s down toward Kachemak Bay and Bristol Bay. Upper 30s Kodiak Island, in the 20s and 30s for the Panhandle. Highs tomorrow staying below 20 in the central Tanana Valley area, Fairbanks out toward Tanana, and below zero from the Brooks Range to the Arctic coast. 35 to 42 southern Alaska, lower 40s Bristol Bay, mid-40s Kodiak Island, lower 40s Alaska Peninsula, 30s lower 40s for the Panhandle. Lows the following morning, 10 to 25 below, coldest on the eastern North Slope and Arctic coast, back below zero for the Tanana Valley. They'll be followed by highs in the teens in the central interior, below zero again, Brooks Range to the Arctic coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Marginal VFR for the North Slope, central North Slope out to the eastern Arctic coast. VFR north of the Yukon River, and then IFR for the eastern Bering Sea from the Bering Strait southward to the Fox Islands. Marginal VFR central Aleutians, back to IFR Shimmy and Attu. IFR southwest coast, and a zone there extending east-northeastward up to the Kuskokwim Mountains, western Alaska Range, into the mid and upper Tanana Valley to the border there, including the Eagle, southward to the eastern Alaska Range, Prince William Sound, areas of IFR, central and north coast of the Panhandle, otherwise marginal VFR. And then for the day on, or for the afternoon, Thursday, VFR, Yukon River, right up to the Arctic coast for the afternoon tomorrow. And IFR continues, Bering Strait, western Seward Peninsula, southward, St. Lawrence Island to St. Paul, St. George, Fox Islands and Atka Island, marginal VFR, Alaska Peninsula, central western Aleutians, IFR, western Cook Inlet up to the central Alaska Range, still covering the mid and upper Tanana Valley and 40-mile country from about Eagle southward to the North Gulf Coast. And all the Panhandle socked in with IFR flying conditions extending back to Resurrection Bay and even into Portage, or possibly Portage, but probably just marginal for Girdwood, Anchorage, Eagle River, and Palmer. And then for the day Friday, areas of IFR, southern Alaska, mostly to complete VFR Friday morning, central northern interior out to the Arctic coast, some IFR, southeast Bering Sea, and a band from the north shores of the Fox Islands, staying north of Adak and Atka. IFR entrenched over the southeast coast, up along the North Gulf Coast, Copper River Basin, and into the 40-mile country and west, or all of Prince William Sound into the Kenai Peninsula. And for the afternoon Friday, improving conditions, good VFR up north, central northern interior, some marginal VFR eastern Arctic coast, possibly. Still a couple of patches of IFR there, one over the Pribilofs and then one southwest of Cape Neuenham in the Bering Sea. Northern Bering Sea clearing out pretty good. St. Lawrence Island, VFR, and almost St. Matthew Island, marginal for the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Southern Alaska, marginal VFR, IFR now for the eastern North Gulf Coast, Valdez on up to Thompson Pass, Copper River Basin, possibly spilling into the North Waytoka area, and Yakutat IFR and the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay and over toward the eastern border of the Panhandle IFR, otherwise marginal conditions. Anatuvik, BFR, good flying weather for Attigan as well. Sea lanes visibility is unlimited. Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR. Rainy, IFR. Windy, IFR. And for Isabel, IFR as well. Mentasta, go for an IFR day there at times as well. And Tanita, pessimistically IFR, could be marginal, especially on the western entrance. Portage, though, IFR, lowest conditions, eastern entrance, and Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels at the surface across southern Alaska, 4,000 feet, though, right around Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, into the Kuskokwim Delta, Pribilof Island areas. And as far as icing goes, a lot of moisture in across southern Alaska for areas of moderate rime icing, mixed icing out over the Bering Sea to the Aleutians. But basically rime icing, considerable moderate, Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands across the southern Kenai Peninsula, southern Prince William Sound, along the North Gulf Coast to Yakutat, looks pretty good for considerable moderate at times. Otherwise, light to isolated moderate for the southeast coast. Jet stream, 33,000-foot wind flow chart, big upper level high there over the Russian Far East. Northeast flow, 80 knots, coming down into the eastern Arctic coast, becoming more easterly, becomes easterly across the northern Bering Sea. And southeast winds 70 to 75 knots, western Aleutians, and winds about 80 knots in across the southern Panhandle. 9,000 feet shows low pressure just east of Unalaska, so southeast winds 30 to 40 knots, Alaska Peninsula to just north of the Pribilofs, even stronger through the Bering Strait, Seward Peninsula, 40 to 65 knots there. Southwest 40 knots there on the south coast of the Panhandle. Looking at 3,000 feet, easterlies 50 to 65 knots there from the Seward Peninsula across the northern Bering Sea. Southeast 40 for the Alaska Peninsula. Turbulence, considerable moderate chop, central interior, especially along the Yukon River.
Some places on the surface you might have these steep cracks and giant fissures that you would have to be careful not to fall into. In other places you might see towers of ice right next to places that were relatively smooth. You might see places that were dark. Ice there takes the form of rock. It's frozen solid until you dig down into that ocean. So you may see some things that look similar to Earth, but you may see some things that are very different.
That voice you just heard?
I am Morgan Kramer, NASA scientist.
I love it.
That's Morgan. She's probably one of NASA's best spokespeople for exploring our solar system's icy moons.
Europa's a fascinating place. It has this liquid water ocean that's about 3 times the volume of all of Earth's oceans combined. That's a lot of water.
To understand what makes Earth so special, sometimes you need to back up and take in the big picture. Remember, the cryosphere is every place on Earth with frozen water. And water is one of the biggest indicators for life.
Every place, at least so far, that we have found life, we found water along with it.
And so far, Earth is the only planet we know of with life. Although Europa isn't the only icy moon in our solar system, NASA has identified it as one of those places with key astrobiological potential. Morgan is a collaborator on the Mapping Imaging Spectrometer for Europa, an instrument selected for NASA's next mission to Jupiter's icy moon Europa. But she's also more than just a scientist working in a laboratory. She's preparing future NASA missions for success on the surface of alien worlds. This year, Morgan and her colleagues were in the field studying how life colonizes in fresh lava.
Earth, it turns out, has a lot of excellent, what we call analog environments, places that are similar enough to some of these other worlds that we can conduct some tests and we can do some analyses here. Now, they're not perfect, of course. They're not going to be exactly like Europa, but we can still learn a lot by testing in these environments. Some of these places include Antarctica and the Arctic Circle, but there are other places too, Alaska, Greenland, even Iceland. Any place where you have a lot of ice, because guess what the surface of Europa is made of? A lot of ice.
Studying the cryosphere doesn't just have big implications for Earth. It also matters for the frozen worlds in our own cosmic backyard.
If we're able to find life or evidence of past life on a place like Europa, that tells us that not only can life happen in other places, but it's common enough that it happened at least twice in the same tiny solar system. That means that the universe is wide open in terms of how much life we might find, the types of life we might find. It would revolutionize how we see ourselves and the possibilities for contact in the universe. It would be amazing. Oh, it's so exciting.
As it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. And so it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving. My interest in glaciers comes from the sheer size of these things and how much they're able to change on human timescales. And so the amount of mass and energy being transferred by glaciers around the globe is tremendous. It's an absolutely fascinating thing to study from space.
Mountain glaciers are some of the most charismatic parts of the cryosphere. Some might cling to the edges of cliffs at higher elevations, then lay bare and flat in a broad plain, looking cracked and weathered like elephant skin, before tumbling thousands of feet toward the sea and terminating in a dramatic calving front. They're like motion frozen in time, until they aren't. They tell a story about the distant past and yet are incredibly responsive to the present. You can understand why they'd be captivating to all of us, and especially cryospheric scientists. Meet Alex Gardner, a cryospheric scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who is going to help break down what a classic West Coast North American glacier might look like, where high amounts of snow dump onto the mountains.
And at higher elevations, there's melt in summer, but not enough melt to get rid of all of that snow. And so that snow accumulates, it compacts, it turns into ice, and it starts to flow under its own weight, and it flows down the valleys. And as it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. And so it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out and down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving.
Alex uses satellite data to study large-scale changes in glacial ice. But 2,000 miles to the north, Chris Larson from the University of Alaska Fairbanks spends a lot of time studying glaciers from the air. He's been flying over Alaskan mountain glaciers for many years, most recently on a NASA-funded mission called Operation Icebridge Alaska. He's absolutely enamored with his local rivers of ice.
And what do you love about mountain glaciers?
Well, they're in mountains, so they're really pretty.
You couldn't ask for a better way to experience Alaska on a large scale than to go flying around for campaign after campaign and look at all of the mountains in Alaska. Truly infinite. You just feel like you'll never see the end of them and don't want to either.
But Chris doesn't spend weeks away from home and family for the views. Chris and his colleagues at NASA want to answer some pretty big questions by learning more about Alaskan glaciers and how they tick.
You know, why does NASA care about these? Well, they actually disproportionately contribute a large amount to sea level rise.
In the long run, as the Earth warms due to climate change, the big ice sheets and mighty outlet glaciers of Greenland and Antarctica stand to contribute the most to sea level rise, simply because the vast majority of the planet's ice is stored there. But currently, it's the world's smaller mountain glaciers in comparatively warmer places like Alaska and Patagonia that are contributing about a third of all inputs to sea level rise, even though they account for only 1% of the world's ice.
Mostly due to them being dynamic. They have water at the bed, which allows them to slide fast, and they react quickly to climate change and have higher velocities than their polar counterparts.
Back at JPL, Alex uses satellite measurements of global ice and computer models to predict ultimately how much sea level rise we might see due to climate change. But in the case of mountain glaciers, we also care about the local impacts of disappearing ice.
When we think of changes in ice sheets, we typically think of just what is the consequence for sea level rise and the future evolution of the ice sheets. But glaciers in other regions, like high mountain Asia, Alaska, the European Alps, these are places where changes in runoff matters to stream flows. In places like high mountain Asia, you have a lot of glaciers that feed the streams that flow down to populated regions. And that runoff becomes significant for water resources, irrigation, and agriculture.
Both Alex and Chris are passionate about understanding how glaciers are changing and what it means for our planet's future. They'll continue to use tools like elevation maps from the ICESat-2 satellite and detailed airborne measurements to monitor changing ice.
By the end of the tunnel, you're about 100 feet underground, and you're surrounded by bones sticking out of the wall from the steppe bison and the mastodons. There's sticks that are 40,000 years old. There's grass that's still green, that's tens of thousands of years old.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast. Small craft advisories on the south coast. There, the panhandles for southerlies at 25 to 30 knots, seas around 8 feet. And southeast 30-knot winds on the north coast, 8 to 10-foot seas up that way. And for the Clarence Strait area, small craft advisories. Southeast winds 25 knots. A little lighter there for Stevens Passage. Southeast sustained at 20 knots, seas at about 4 feet. And northern interchannels winds are south. Will be south at 10 knots for the day tomorrow, Thursday, with 2-foot seas. And for the afternoon, or for Friday, south winds 15 knots, central and northern inside waters, 3-foot seas. Clarence Strait, small craft advisory, southeast winds 25 knots with 5-foot seas. And for the central and south coast, west winds 15 knots, 7-foot seas. Southwest 15 for the north coast with 7-foot seas. Prince William Sound for Thursday, winds will be northeast at 15 knots with 3-foot seas. Small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast, winds easterly at 30 knots with 9 to 10-foot seas. Gale warnings for Barren Islands, east winds 35 knots. And small craft advisories for Southern Cook Inlet and Camashack Bay, winds forecast to be north to northeast at about 30 knots with 9 to 11-foot seas. Northern Cook Inlet, northerlies at 20 knots. Pretty light winds for Prince William Sound on Friday from the east at about 10 knots, seas down to 2 feet. South to southeast winds 15 knots for the North Gulf Coast and southeast at 20 for the Barren Islands, seas there around 10 feet. And east winds, Camashack Bay at 20 knots. Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds 10 to 20 knots, strongest south of the Forelands, seas 3 to 5 feet. Kodiak Island, east-southeast 20 to 25 knots for the day on Thursday. Alaska Peninsula, east to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots as well with 6 to 11-foot seas. And Bristol Bay, small craft advisories, east winds 25 knots. For Friday, for the east side of Kodiak Island, southerlies at 25 knots, otherwise Shelikof Strait looking at an east wind at 20. And for the Alaska Peninsula, Bering Sea side, northeast at 20, Pacific side west at 20 knots. And for Bristol Bay, small craft advisories, northeast winds 25 knots. On Alaska Island, north side, northeast at 15, Pacific side west at 20, Unmak Island, west-northwest 25 knots, Adak and Atka, west-northwest 20 to 25 knots. Amchitka Island west at 20, and from Kiska to Shemya, winds will be southeast at 20 knots with 10-foot seas. For Friday, Shemya to Kiska, north winds at 20 knots. Amchitka Island southwest at 20. Small craft advisories, Adak and Atka, southwesterlies at 25 to 30 knots. Unamak Island, small craft advisories for west southwesterlies 25 to 30 knots, and west winds 15 to 25 for Unalaska Island. Gale warnings for the northern Bering Sea, northeast winds 35 knots, small craft advisories for the Pribilofs, northeast at 25, and the southwest coast, small craft advisories northeast 30 knots, and 45 knot gales for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound out of the northeast. Moving ahead to Friday, those winds come down a little bit, but still looking at gale, especially for Norton Sound, sustained northeast 40 knot winds there, and 35 knots for St. Lawrence Island. And small crafts continue for the southwest coast, northeast 25 to 30 knots. Same thing for St. Matthew Island, northeast at 30. Pribilofs coming down to 20 knots, holding on to a northeasterly direction. Light variable winds for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and for the central coast, winds will be southwest at about 10. Then the winds pick up as you head down toward Point Lay, becoming east at 20 knots. And then from Cape Beaufort to Wales, brisk wind advisories, northeast winds 30 knots. And for Friday, brisk wind advisories continue from Wales to Cape Beaufort for north to northeast winds at 25 knots. And the central and western Arctic coast, northeast at 10, and the east side looking at a west wind at 10 to 15 knots. For tonight, again, winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings out for many big location of the eastern interior, just about from the eastern Arctic coast all the way down to the Copper River Basin. High wind warning out for eastern Norton Sound and the southern coast of the Seward Peninsula, including Nome, Gulliver, and White Mountain, for winds gusting to 65 miles an hour through Thursday night. Otherwise, rain and snow for the North Gulf Coast, increasing moisture along the coast of the Panhandle late tonight. Rain and snow for the southeast coast tomorrow, as well as the North Gulf Coast. Blowing snow continues over southern Alaska up into the upper Yukon Valley and the flats areas there. Very windy through the Brooks Range. And then the outlook for Friday, diminishing winds and stays snowy over southern Alaska, clear and chilly central and northern interior.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.